There's a curious phenomenon about human behavior. The more confident someone appears, the more likely they are to be hiding something. Psychology has proven that exaggerated self-confidence often serves as a defense against deep-seated insecurities. Think about the most arrogant people you know. Are they really confident, or are they desperately trying to prove something? Philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche once said that every strong man finds pleasure in overcoming obstacles. But what if someone's apparent strength is nothing more than a mask? The world teaches us to admire the self-confident, but the brutal truth is that everyone has insecurities. It's just that some are better at hiding them than others. Society has conditioned us to believe that confidence is synonymous with competence. This is a mistake. If it were true, we wouldn't see so many insecure leaders, multimillionaire entrepreneurs who live in fear of failure, or world-famous celebrities who resort to drugs and therapies to deal with pressure. Psychologist Albert Bandura, creator of the self-efficacy theory, showed that true confidence comes from experience and successful repetition of actions, not from a rehearsed pose. So if most people haven't built this genuine confidence, what do? Simple, they fake it. Which brings us to a critical question. How do we spot this sham? The answer lies in the details. Insecurity manifests itself in subtle ways, in gestures that are almost imperceptible but that reveal someone's true psychological state. A glance that quickly averts, a smile that lasts a little longer than natural, a laugh that's too loud in a situation that doesn't require it. Small lapses in intonation, a hesitation before speaking, the exaggerated need to emphasize achievements or mention influential connections. All of these scream fear of not being enough. Plato already argued that man is a needy being, and insecurity is nothing more than the manifestation of this need in varying degrees. And the most fascinating thing? Many people who think they're confident don't realize that they're constantly revealing their weaknesses. There is a paradox in all this. The insecure person believes that he or she is hiding his or her vulnerability, but by trying to mask it, he or she ends up exposing it in a different way. A classic example of this are those individuals who need to be the funniest in the room, always seeking validation from others. Or those who speak too loudly, as if they needed to make sure their presence is noticed. Have you ever noticed how certain leaders can't take criticism and need to put others down to reaffirm their position? That's not confidence, that's desperation. Desperation to maintain an illusion that could crumble at any moment. The irony is that while many try to hide their insecurities, they are precisely those that shape much of their decisions and behavior. The fear of failure, the dread of rejection, the anguish of not being recognized, these are invisible forces that push people down predictable paths. And those who understand this can predict reactions, influence decisions, and in some cases, completely control a situation. After all, what happens when someone discovers their insecurity and knows exactly where to press? Here comes a little discussed but extremely powerful concept. False self-confidence is a psychological prison. The more a person tries to maintain this unshakable image, the more vulnerable they become to those who can see beyond the facade. Which means that if you understand how human insecurity works, you can anticipate other people's moves and gain an absurd advantage in any interaction. This is the first key to transforming other people's insecurity into a strategic asset. And now that you know that absolute confidence is a myth, we need to go further and answer an even deeper question. How do people let their insecurities show without even realizing it? The human mind is tricky. When we try to hide something, we often end up doing exactly the opposite, exposing our fragility in an even more obvious way. And the worst part? We don't even realize it. This is one of the biggest mistakes people make. They believe they can mask their insecurities, when in fact they are constantly screaming for validation. Let's test this out. Think of someone who talks non-stop about their achievements, money, or status. Does this person's speech convey confidence or a silent desperation to be recognized? The French philosopher Blaise Pascal once said, "Insecurity reveals itself in excess, never in absence." Truly powerful people don't need to prove anything to anyone, which means that every time someone insists on reaffirming their worth, what they are actually showing is fear. Fear of not being enough, fear of not being seen, fear of being irrelevant. And that is exactly what makes them vulnerable. Body language is even more revealing. Have you ever talked to someone who has a fixed, exaggerated smile, as if they were trying to hide their discomfort? Or do you avoid eye contact, fidget with your hands, or adjust your posture repeatedly? Small gestures like these betray insecurity in a way that words never could. Psychologist Paul Ekman, one of the world's leading experts on facial expressions, has discovered that involuntary microexpressions, such as a quick raise of the eyebrow, a subtle tightening of the mouth, a sideways glance, reveal authentic emotions before a person even realizes it. In other words, the body gives away what the mind tries to hide. But vulnerability doesn't just show up physically. It's also in words. Expressions like, "I know this may seem silly, but sorry to bother you, this should be obvious to everyone but me," are unconscious requests for validation. People who start sentences with these introductions are already putting themselves in a lower position before they even speak. Once again, the fatal mistake, trying to appear humble or casual, often exposes hidden insecurity. Another classic sign of insecurity is the need to always be right. Truly confident people don't worry about winning every argument, but those who are dominated by fear of rejection or imposter syndrome, they need to win at all costs. Have you ever noticed how some people raise their voices when they feel like they're losing an argument? How they repeat the same idea over and over again, as if they're trying to convince themselves. This happens because they're not just defending an idea, but their own identity. And this makes them incredibly predictable and easy to manipulate. But there's an even more subtle mistake, and perhaps the most dangerous of all, the desperate search for belonging. People who don't know their own worth are incessantly seeking approval from others. They're the ones who laugh at jokes they don't find funny. They agree with opinions they don't even believe in, just to avoid conflict. They change their behavior depending on who's around them. All of this because deep down, they're terrified of being excluded. The philosopher Hannah Arendt said that the fear of isolation drives man to commit the greatest follies. And this is brutally true. Insecure people are so obsessed with being accepted that they end up trapped in cycles of submission and often don't even realize how much they're giving in to maintain an illusion of belonging. Now, think about the impact of this. If you know how to identify these insecurities in others, if you notice when someone seeks validation, when they try to hide discomfort, when they change their posture for fear of rejection, you already have an advantage. Because once a weakness is exposed, it can be used. This brings us to the most important question so far. How can you turn these insecurities into a strategic asset and use them to your advantage? Knowing how to identify someone's insecurity already gives you power. But knowing what to do with this information is what really puts you at an advantage. The world doesn't revolve around strength, intelligence, or appearance. It revolves around social control. And control doesn't mean explicit domination, but rather subtle influence over how people think, feel, and act around you. And insecurity is the perfect opportunity for this. Let's look at a simple psychological fact. Human beings make decisions based more on fear than logic. Daniel Kahneman, winner of the Nobel Prize in Economics, proved this in his studies on prospect theory. He showed that people avoid losing more than they seek to gain. In other words, most people don't act to achieve something, but rather to avoid discomfort, be it rejection, failure, or humiliation. What does this mean in practice? That someone who feels that they might lose something valuable to their self-esteem or status will be more likely to give in, to agree, to follow your suggestion without even realizing that they are being guided. Here's a powerful technique based on this principle: the mirror effect. Here's how it works. When you subtly mirror someone's insecurity back to them, you create a sense of familiarity and trust. If someone is afraid of looking stupid, show them that you once had that same doubt. If someone is afraid of not being accepted, give them the impression that you understand them like no one else. This eases their mind, making them see you as someone who is secure and trustworthy. And the moment they trust you, they become more easily influenced. Another strategy is controlled validation. Insecure people are hungry for approval. But here's the thing: if you give this validation away for free, it loses its value. The key is to give it in a measured and strategic way. First, by leaving the person slightly uncertain about where they stand in relation to you, making them actively seek your approval. Then, by reinforcing this recognition at the right time, cementing a bond of influence. An example of this is in the power dynamics between superiors and subordinates. Good leaders never validate their employees all the time, but rather at strategic moments, when they need someone's loyalty and extra effort. The same is true in social relationships. If you know how to balance interest and distance, approval and challenge, you create a psychological game where the other person feels like they need to earn your validation, and not the other way around. This automatically puts you in a position of advantage. But perhaps the most powerful tool of all is the game of subtle dominance. Unlike overt manipulation, this strategy works through small social commands that go unnoticed, but have a profound effect. Something as simple as taking the lead in a conversation, being the one asking the questions and setting the pace, or even controlling your body language in a way that conveys confidence and calm, while others are showing anxiety. All of this changes the invisible power dynamic between you and the people around you. And here's the most brutal detail. Those who perceive others' insecurity and act intelligently don't need to be the strongest, the most handsome, or the most intelligent. They just need to know how to position themselves so that others perceive them as someone higher up in the social hierarchy. This is real influence. And once you learn how to use it, you can begin to shape other people's behavior without them even noticing. There is a real danger in understanding people's insecurities, the abuse of this knowledge. It is easy to get lost in the illusion of control and fall into the trap of manipulation. But here's what few understand. Manipulators always lose in the long run, because unlike strategic influence, which generates respect and loyalty, manipulation creates resentment, distrust, and ultimately enemies who want you down. The difference between manipulation and influence is intent. The manipulator uses the insecurities of others to his own advantage, without regard for the consequences. He exploits weaknesses to undermine others' self-confidence and make people dependent on him. The clever strategist, on the other hand, understands insecurity, but uses this knowledge to create valuable relationships where both parties benefit. Napoleon Bonaparte was a master at this. He knew that his generals feared appearing weak, and instead of exploiting this to control them, he used it to encourage them to be loyal and overcome their own fears. He created a sense of belonging, making his troops feel like they were part of something bigger. This isn't manipulation. It's strategic leadership. So how do you make sure your influence doesn't breed resentment? First, never humiliate someone for their insecurity. Nothing breeds resentment like being publicly exposed. If you identify someone's weakness, hold that information as a silent asset, not a weapon. Instead of attacking directly, redirect the social dynamic so that they feel inclined to follow you, not fight you. Second, use validation in a balanced way. We've already talked about controlled validation, but here's a key detail. If you make someone feel small for too long, they'll develop resentment. True influence is about maintaining a balance between challenge and recognition, creating an environment where people strive to prove themselves without feeling like they're being diminished. Third, understand the value of reciprocity. The law of reciprocity, studied by psychologist Robert Cialdini, shows that people feel obligated to reciprocate gestures of value. In other words, if you provide emotional security and validation at the right time, instead of just exploiting insecurities, you create a bond where your influence becomes natural, not forced. Finally, the golden rule: always leave people feeling like they have gained something from you. Those who feel empowered by your side will never see you as a threat. And, in the end, true strength lies not in tearing others down, but in making them want to follow you. Now you have powerful knowledge in your hands. You know how to identify insecurities, you understand how to use them to your advantage, and, most importantly, you have learned how to do this without creating enemies. But remember, the biggest mistake of those who hold social power is to underestimate the impact of their actions. The game of influence requires precision, intelligence, and above all, awareness of what is at stake.